So we can start our discussion of work by asking what is a workplace? Just like last week when I started the discussion on the education system with asking what is education, we can take a similar approach here by outlining the various forms that a workplace can take. So first, we could conceptualize workplaces as a structure, as a disciplinary structure and space. Just like many of the other disciplinary spaces we've looked at so far in this course, such as prisons and doctors' offices and classrooms, workplaces, very much fit that definition that I provided in the week 3 lecture on power of a disciplinary space that is a social space with its own physical structures as well as its own accompanying discourse and signs and figures and knowledge and all that, so that whenever anyone enters into one of these social spaces of the workplace, they adopt its specific rules and modify their thinking and behaviors to fit within that structure and discourse. And you can see that in the physical structuring of cubicles and office workspaces that you can see in the picture just behind my head here. A lot of the same features that we noted with the structuring of a school and classrooms can be seen in various workplaces, not just office cubicles, but also like factory work. And even though those two workplaces are very different from each other, with a factory having a very strict vertical hierarchy and everyone has a rigidly defined role and they're often just stuck in one place beside like a conveyor belt, and the conveyor belt just moves things along for that worker to work on. The disciplinary effects between those two workplaces are more similar than you'd think. Even though they're producing two very different subjects, the factory worker is meant to be kind of docile and immobile, fixed in place, not only physically in their place in the physical structure of the factory, but fixed in place in terms of their position in the hierarchy. More contemporary workplaces, such as office spaces, work very differently, but to approximately similar effects. So they're not fixing employees into place as much. Again, either physically or in terms of job status. There's a lot more mobility that the modern worker has. So there's seemingly a lot more freedom compared to the more overtly oppressive disciplinary structure of the factory. But remember when we said that power doesn't need to be centralized. Power is often individualized, and that is exhibited perfectly with the concept of a cubicle. How you don't need to be exposed to the all-seeing eye of the factory floor manager. You'll kind of carry your discipline with you wherever you go if you're an employee of one of these more contemporary work institutions. You can work in this cubicle or that cubicle or this floor or that floor or this office or that office, or go on trips or be promoted or work in various overlapping groups of superiors and subordinates. But the end product of this structure and discourse surrounding our working lives and experiences is the subject position of the good worker, the model employee, whether that be the factory worker or the corporate employee. So just like we considered all the structures that exist within the institution of the school, consider all the structures that are in place at your workplace or your previous workplaces. Could be an office job where movements are channeled into hallways and cubicles, but also think about meeting rooms and staff rooms, or the break room or the lunch room. Think about the physical architecture of your building that you work in, if you work in a building. The reception area, the HR area, as well as the roles, the owner, the manager, the employee, the IT person, the administrative people. And just like doctors and nurses have their own uniforms, often these come with their own informally recognized uniforms, so you can identify people by their status more easily. And then also think about all the technology, like we were talking about with gyms and fitness centers as a disciplinary space, and how even to get into the gym, there's all sorts of technological barriers, like scanning your membership card. I've worked in both factories and offices, and they both required some sort of sign in or scan in to even get access to the working space to begin with. And with all discourses, think about the other elements that are circulating within the discourse in which you're working. Again, could be any context, doesn't need to be a strict office setting or a strict factory setting. You could work in a restaurant or a grocery store. You could work completely independently. You could be your own business and be your own boss, and you'll still be enveloped in some sort of discourse of what it means to work and the symbols surrounding it and the meanings and values surrounding it. So other elements of the discourse include the work policies that are written down and also the unspoken norms of a workplace culture and the relationships within it and the forms of communication within it. And so I should probably move on past workplace as a structure to talk about workplace as relationships now. Because instead of just looking at workplace as a structure, you can look at it as a series of overlapping concurrent relationships of various types. So peer-to-peer relationships between your fellow coworkers, or the supervisor-employee relationship, or the employee-client relationship, and all sorts of these relationships that we cycle through and engage in throughout our working experiences. And again, even if you're working alone, even if you're like an entrepreneur, you can't just exist in an island or a vacuum. There has to be some sort of relationship you're engaging with. Even if you are your own boss, even if you don't have an employees working for you, you likely have some clients or customers or investors who you need to maintain a healthy working relationship with and make a good impression on. And these relationships can be formal or they can be more informal. So the supervisor-employee relationship is quite formal. It's entrenched in the policies of that company, in the job roles and responsibilities of each respective party in that relationship. And there can be all sorts of informal relationships that emerge and potentially overlap with those formal ones. Maybe you become friends with some of your coworkers and socialize with them even outside of work, so that informal relationship is overlaid on top of that formal one. They can potentially reinforce each other, like you might work harder for your friend if they ask you to do something, or they could threaten to destabilize those relationships. If you get too friendly with your coworker or your boss, then it might cause some conflicts of interest between your relationship with them and the tasks and duties that they want you to perform. And just like I mentioned on the week on conversation, you can't have communication without relationships, and you can't have relationships without communication. And we can look at workplace as communication. Like I said, you don't have to be physically tied down to any work-related structure. You could be a traveling salesperson or going on a business trip or working from home. In that case, your work could entirely be communication. If you work in like customer support for a company, that might not require you to come into a physical office structure to perform that job. You can do it from home and just have a headset in or be on the phone or communicate through emails or fax or reports or other forms of communication that proliferate at work. Again, just as you can't really do anything in culture or society or everyday life without communicating, like that's the medium through which we share meaning and possess meaning as members of a culture. The same goes for work and the workplace. You can't have work. You can't have a workplace unless you have some modes of communication. Again, this can be formal. This can be entrenched written policies and memos and documents, but it can also be informal conversations between individuals. And just as cultures reproduce themselves by members sharing meaning, sharing representation, telling each other stories, and talking to each other to pass down information from generation to generation, that's how organizations reproduce themselves over time through the conversations between individuals. So when you become a new employee of a company and you're being trained, of course you're going to get like a welcome manual, an employee manual, and all that formal stuff, but you're probably also going to get trained by a fellow employee there, one who can show you the ropes and show you how it's done through that informal communication. So that whenever anyone is doing anything at work, they're doing that on the basis of referring back to previous conversations they've had with their bosses or their coworkers, so that the informal rules and the formal rules are carried over so that you can have a completely new workforce a decade after you started your company, but that new workforce will carry with them a lot of the original values and norms and culture of that business organization because they've been told and taught and learned from their predecessors through communication. Fourthly, you can look at workplace as a culture with shared meanings and routines. And an organizational culture can vary dramatically from workplace to workplace. Even workplaces that are in the same industry could look radically different if it has a strict work culture or a more loose and relaxed work culture. So we can see a work culture in action on the image on the left of this slide, which seems to be quite a casual, loose, and group-oriented and potentially fun working place where someone's liable to break out an acoustic guitar at any moment just for an impromptu jam session. Who couldn't use that in the workday? And mechanisms like the dress code contribute to an organizational culture. So if it's a strict dress code, it may lead to a stricter culture. And if it's a loose dress code, like the one in that image, where 3 of the 6 members are wearing hats indoors and there's a lot of plaid going on, that seems to contribute to the lax atmosphere of this workplace. And it is a workplace. You can see a chart in the background and you can see writing utensils on the table. But within that workplace, and potentially even superseding the work they're doing, is the culture, the atmosphere they're facilitating. You see a couple of them are holding coffee cups, so maybe this is just right at the beginning of the workday, and this is like their bonding exercise for the group. I especially like the blonde woman in the middle of all the action, just loving her life, getting her groove on to start the day, and who knows, she may be the boss. It's impossible to tell in this picture which of those 6 members are the boss. It seems to be a very much flattened hierarchy where everyone is on the same playing field as a team member or group member, which contrasts with that strict vertical hierarchy I mentioned with the factory. And workplace culture will affect other aspects of a workplace. It will affect the modes of communication that are popular within that workplace. Again, a very strict workplace culture may have very formal modes of communication, whereas a more relaxed workplace culture could have more informal modes of communication, such as water cooler talk, or maybe like an instant messaging communications platform rather than just strictly emails or memos. And the culture will also affect the relationships, as I mentioned. A strict workplace culture could have more vertical relationships, top to bottom, boss to employee, whereas a more relaxed workplace culture could have more horizontal relationships, peer to peer, employee to employee. So a lot of these are interrelated, like the structure influences the culture, and the culture influences the communication, and vice versa. And we can also look at workplace as an identity, a specific work identity that you perform when you're at work or in work. So we can see the McDonald's employee at the top of this slide performing their work identity of the friendly cashier at this fast food restaurant. And part of this performance, part of this adopted identity for this work requires a cheery disposition, relentlessly friendly and hospitable to whoever wants to order food, however rude the client may be or impatient. That smile that the McDonald's cashier is wearing is kind of like their mask, their adopted identity. And that mask that they're wearing, that performance that they're engaging in, is furnished by the surrounding stage that they're performing on. So that they're behind the cashier, they're behind the cash register. They're wearing their uniform with the hat with the M on it. They're performing specific scripts, the jargon that's specific to their workplace. So, welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order? Would you like to supersize that? Would you like to turn that into a meal? All of those lines are part of the script for this performed identity, which may not reflect or have any connection to how that person acts and feels and thinks outside of work. Like in the top right image of the slide, we have SpongeBob at work at the Krabby Patty. And again, there's that bright, cheery disposition. And then at home, they're a lot more Squidward-like because there's no one to perform for in that setting. You can finally take off the mask for the day and kick your feet up and just be yourself. And finally, we can look at workplace as a mindset, as a state of mind that you have to enter into while working, regardless of where you are physically. So especially since the onset of the pandemic, going to work doesn't necessarily involve a change of locations anymore from home to work. Oftentimes we find ourselves, as I find myself right now in this very moment, working from home, where the setting remains exactly the same as where you relax and spend the rest of your everyday life. But you just have to put yourself into that working mindset, which is easier said than done when there's nothing or no one in your immediate proximity to cue you into performing your workplace identity. Like that McDonald's employee, they have all the contextual cues in their work environment to prompt them to perform that identity. But me working at home right now, I can't see the students who I'm teaching right now. My boss isn't anywhere in the room to tell me how to do my job. There's nothing in my room that would indicate that I should be working right now, that this is a job that I'm performing. So it can make it very difficult to get into that necessary state of mind to perform a job when you're in the exact same setting in which you do other things in other areas of life, like you're outside the kitchen or the TV room or the bedroom. And it can kind of blur the lines between where work is supposed to happen and where it's not. Like there used to be a much more demarcated, rigid distinction between work life and home life. But now that distinction is increasingly blurred, so that the place that I used to associate with relaxation, my home, is now increasingly associated with work and stress and demands and responsibilities. So now it's not just a matter of clocking in from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then once you've done work for the day, leaving the work at work and going home and just enjoying your life outside of work. Now the work kind of bleeds into all areas of everyday life. Like I said last week, with the digitization of education, I feel like now that I'm teaching online, I'm on call 24/7. Used to be just walk into school, do a 2-hour lecture, leave. Now it's roll out of bed, spend an entire day recording and editing a lecture. And then even when I'm done, it's not just a matter of leaving and being done. There's all sorts of emails to field and comments to grade, so that work, by virtue of being done at home, now seems to infiltrate so much of the rest of everyday life. Like I could be walking to the drugstore, the grocery store, and I just peek down on my phone and I see an email notification. And it's a work email, so that even when I'm at the grocery store shopping for groceries and doing actions that are completely unrelated to my work, I'm in that work mindset still. That's been activated as soon as I see that email notification. And you see here in the slide an image of a young father who's literally balancing and juggling the roles of being a father and being an employee simultaneously. He's got the headset on. He seems to be in some sort of a teleconferencing meeting, and he's on his computer getting work done while holding a baby who seems to be holding a sharp object in their left hand. I would pay a bit more attention to that. But still, in that moment, he has to jump from the mindset of a father to the mindset of an employee, despite literally being at home and holding the thing that he has fatherly responsibilities towards as he's still within that work mindset. So these are various yet interrelated ways of conceiving a workplace. I'm curious to see if you have any other suggestions. There are so many different types of work, so that just one definition as listed on this screen might not capture the essence of any given work. So like if you're an entrepreneur, the mindset one may resonate with you more than the structure one. Any given work experience probably entails a combination of multiple of these ways of conceiving workplaces. And like I said, maybe even more beyond what's listed on this slide. Our ways of conceptualizing work are non-exhaustive. So I'm curious to see what you think of work and how you view and approach work based on your lived experiences with working various positions and various types of work.